One thing that I've always heard, people will say, oh, he or she likes to argue. You'd be a great lawyer. I don't like to argue. I'm not a combative person. So I don't think that always rings true. I think the most important thing is that you can critically think and you can persuade and you can advocate your position and you have grit to be able to persevere when you have a challenge, to have staying power, be true to who you are, acknowledge your voice, and it'll all fall into place.
Hey everyone, welcome to Girls Can, a series of podcasts created to help educate and inform young women throughout the world.
Our goal is to empower and inspire the next generation,
because the girls of today become the future leaders of tomorrow.
Today, we have a very special guest in the studio. Lisa Darnley Cooper is an attorney at Arendall Harrison Sale Law Firm, and she's going to talk to us about getting started in a law career and the things women should know for following that path. She attended law school at the University of Alabama in 1999. She primarily focuses on employment, related and business matters, and her experience includes defending employers in discrimination, harassment, and retaliation in state and federal courts. She has extensive experience drafting employee handbooks and workplace policies, contracts, and non-competition and non-solicitation agreements. She is frequently called upon to conduct a variety of workplace investigations or audits. Her work portfolio spans numerous industries and workplace settings, including transportation and trucking, healthcare, manufacturing, construction, retail, utilities, automotive, education, tourism, and municipalities, as well as state agencies. Welcome to the studio, Mrs. Lisa Darnley Cooper.
Hey, Grace. Thanks for having me.
Clearly, you're an expert at your job, and a lot of women nowadays want to go into law. But how did you get started?
Interestingly enough, I didn't actually know I wanted to be a lawyer when I set out to go to college at Alabama. I thought I wanted to go into politics, which I'm supremely glad I did not at this point in my life. But I started out as a political science major, and I thought I would maybe end up at law school because that's kind of a typical path for someone who goes into politics. They go to law school first. And I took a women's studies course. It was a entry-level women's studies course at the University of Alabama, and I absolutely loved it. And I decided I really didn't want to do just political science, so I started thinking about what my path might be, and I enrolled in what's called New College at the University of Alabama, and it is a college within the arts and sciences at the university, and you can basically build your own major. And so I crafted my own major. It was called Women in Politics, and essentially I got a bachelor's in political science, the equivalent of that, but also was able to take some more women's studies classes. Ironically, they didn't have anything beyond that kind of undergraduate level, but they had a master's program. So I convinced the university to allow me to sit in and take those graduate level women's studies classes. And that basically kind of laid the groundwork for, critical thinking, learning how to effectively write. So law school was kind of the next logical path. So that's kind of how I started out. I didn't intend to have that particular major, but that's how I got started.
It sounds like those classes were really influential. I wish they offered that in high school. That would be nice.
Yeah, that would be really nice. Yeah. Actually, I was curious thinking about our podcast today, and I went to look to see if New College is still there. And they actually have now a separate college for race and gender studies at the university.
Really?
They were separate programs when I was there. Anyway, it was interesting, and I think prepared me well. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the most important things for someone who's interested in going to law school, maybe not even take a pre-law path. The most important thing I think you need to do is to take a writing intensive curriculum. It is so important to be able to write well. And I think that's true in any profession, to be honest. But I think that is probably the best piece of advice I could give someone.
So did you think you were more of like a language person when you were in high school?
Oh, absolutely.
More than like math and science?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be the really smart math and science. I wanted to be a doctor, but my aptitude did not fit that at all. So you kind of have to go with who you are.
I feel like there's two types of learning. There's like the English and like the language based, and then there's like math and science. And you can have both, but like it depends.
Yeah, I think some people just lend themselves one way or the other, but I definitely was more of a liberal arts leaning person.
Man, I wish I offered those classes because I feel like sometimes I'm a junior, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm in the future. That'd be really nice if we had a class to kind of help us figure out what we wanted to do, because I'm the same way. I'm more of a language person. I don't know what I want to do yet, so.
Well, you shouldn't know what you want to do yet, to be honest. So you'll find your path. You'll find your path.
What is a typical day like for you?
That's a really difficult question because it varies so much. It varies in a lot of ways just based on my caseload. I have two sides to my practice. I'm a litigator, so I defend typically businesses and employers in lawsuits that have been filed. And then I also have a side of my practice, which I call kind of my desk practice, where I act as a counselor to businesses and employers and give them advice regarding various employment law and just business decisions they need to make. So if I have a really heavy caseload in terms of litigation, it could be, interviewing witnesses, prepping witnesses for their depositions, taking the deposition of the plaintiff. And even in litigation, it depends on the stage of the lawsuit. So what I was just describing is the discovery period where the parties are exchanging information, but then you have a period of kind of motion practice. So I could be writing a brief that day. And then if it actually goes to trial, then I could be in the courtroom. Honestly, that doesn't happen very often. Most cases typically are resolved prior to trial or by settlement or through motion practice. So
you're everywhere.
Yes.
Lots of places.
Yes. And then, if I don't have a lot of litigation going on, I'm on the phone a lot. I may be talking to a CEO or a human resource director trying to help them navigate, a reduction in force, whether or not there's legal risk to terminating a particular employee or how to do it. It could be we need to put an employee handbook in place or drafting an employment contract. So it varies greatly, just depending on what's going on.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this, but what was your craziest case that you've ever had?
Oh, goodness. Let me think about that. I would say they're typically the sexual harassment cases.
Oh, I did not think about that.
And they typically, if there's any heat in it, it's going to settle. So they don't go very far.
Is that common?
Unfortunately, it's more common than you would think.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, but I've handled probably, I don't know how many sexual harassment cases I've handled, but I do a lot of counseling at the front end for an employer so they can nip that sort of behavior in the bud in the workplace so they don't face legal exposure. And then, of course, so the conduct will stop. But it's not typical. I handle race, discrimination, age, disability, those sorts of things as well.
So you gave us some fantastic advice about academics going into law, but what type of personality traits do you think would do well in your profession?
I think the most important thing is to be a critical thinker, someone who's logical. It's very helpful in my profession. Someone who can communicate. I mean, I go back to my answer about the importance of writing. Someone who can be able to logically put their thoughts together, persuade, someone who's a good storyteller. I mean, a lot of what I do, especially in the litigation realm, is telling stories of the case to a jury or to the judge. But, one thing that I've always heard people will say, oh, he or she likes to argue. You'd be a great lawyer. I don't like to argue. I do not like to argue. I'm not a combative person. So I don't think that always reigns true. I think the most important thing is that you can critically think and you can persuade and you can advocate your position. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what advice would you give to someone who's currently in your position, like other listeners that are in law? It has to be stressful, but how do you manage that? How do you keep your job fresh and stay motivated in your profession?
It can be very stressful, actually. There's a lot of people that are depending on you. They're facing, it could either be damages in a lawsuit, a very important decision for their business. And the way I manage that is I connect with people, essentially. And that's how I stay fresh. I mean, creating relationships with my clients. It's nice to be needed. And that motivates me. And when I'm able to get a good result for a client, I get more motivated. When I'm able to help someone, I'm more motivated. A good example of that was when the pandemic hit. It was probably the busiest time in my legal career. I mean, clients were so confused and trying to manage how they were going to maintain their businesses, maintain their workforce. There were all these new laws that were passed. We were like drinking through a fire hose of trying to figure out how to help businesses survived this pandemic and with their workforces intact. And that was probably one of the most stressful times of my career. But to be honest, it was the most rewarding because I was able to help businesses survive through that. So that's how I stay motivated. I'm motivated by helping people and my clients.
What do you think is the most difficult thing about your job?
Well, I'll give you the mundane answer first. I am a civil litigator in a defense firm. And so the way I get paid is I bill my time. So I have to bill my time my entire day in 6-minute increments. I hate that.
Oh, no. That sounds
It is horrible. It is horrible. So that's the mundane answer. And I would say probably the most difficult beyond that is just there can be some people that are combative for the sake of being combative and really aren't trying to come to a resolution. I love being an advocate, but like I mentioned before, I don't argue for the sake of arguing. So we're trying to come to a resolution through the process, the rule of law. We have a system in place. There's no reason that it has to be combative. So when I run into people in my profession that are combative for the sake of that, that's bothersome. So those are probably the two things I hate the most.
Yeah. So on the contrary, what do you enjoy most about your job?
It's definitely helping my clients. One of the things that I am blessed to be able to do is I have long-term clients in which I advise them on a regular basis, and they span so many different industries. And so I almost get to act like a third-party executive to a lot of these companies. And it could be an energy company. It can be a doctor's practice. It can be an automobile dealership that I represent. And I get to consult, and I get to be on their team. I get to learn their industries. I get to know their entire business. And I love that. So I feel like I get my hands into a lot of different things. So that's a lot of fun.
That's really interesting. Did you have like a role model when you first started, someone that inspired you in your job?
I would say my biggest inspiration is my mother. She's since passed. She's actually passed away. It'll be 10 years this Independence Day. And she actually worked in and outside of the home, inside of the home most of my life. So, but in terms of inspiration, just how she carried herself, she always was just generous in her spirit. She was everyone's kind of best friend. I realized how many best friends she had after she passed. Everybody said she was my best friend.
Oh.
So, I mean, I want to carry myself in the world the way that she did. And she inspired me to be a good mother. So she's probably my biggest inspiration.
So you have 2 children?
I have 3.
3 children?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Very fun. So what advice would you give to women who are considering working in law too?
Beyond just getting the educational requirements, just stay true to yourself and be confident in your voice and your abilities. Hardest part starting out for me when I started practicing law is kind of doubting myself. But once I got my footing, things started to fall in place. So don't be true to who you are, acknowledge your voice, and it'll all fall into place.
That's really interesting. What do you think are the biggest obstacles for female leaders today?
You know, it's kind of cliche to say this. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, sort of thing. I've been practicing 23 years. When I was starting out, just to kind of give you a sense of it, when I went to the courtroom, I was expected to wear a skirt and pantyhose in Mobile, Alabama.
That's interesting.
In the summer.
It's hot.
Oh, it was horrible, but that was expected. If you were walking to a courtroom, that has obviously changed.
Wait, because that's so interesting. Because in episode 18 with Vivian Figures, one of the main things she talked about was how she passed legislation for women to be able to wear pants on the state floor.
Oh, goodness. Thank God for Senator Figures.
Interesting how that's related. Yeah,
I know it is. So things like that have changed, and we have a lot more diversity on our bench. We have a lot more female judges, prosecutors, and so that's been great. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of difficult because I guess the barriers are not as overt and they're more subtle. And so that's in some ways harder to navigate when you are, when a woman is, when she's facing sexism in the legal profession or in the workplace in general. It's sometimes easier when you know what you're looking at and you can face it head on. But when it's subtle, you start to second guess yourself. So,
that makes sense.
But I do think that, I mean, things have changed so much in the 20 years I've been practicing. And I have been fortunate enough to work at a firm in which I was able to advance without a whole lot of barriers. I mean,
Yeah.
and they were very supportive of me. So I've been very blessed.
So you're dealing with all these gender problems at such a high level in the workplace, but how do you see that playing out in society?
I mean, I have a daughter who's 15, and I think in her lifetime just how much has changed. I think in 15 years it will be even more opportunities for women in leadership in the legal profession and all professions. So, I mean, I'm hopeful.
As a junior in high school, I really hope that does come true because I don't know what my future is going to be like someday. But since you have all these stressful things from like COVID pandemics to dealing with people to pantyhose, how do you relax from all of this?
You know, my favorite way to relax is to get me on the water. I mean, I am a Mobile girl. You put me on a boat, I'm happy. You put me on a beach, I am happy. So my family has a house on Soldier Creek in Lillian, Alabama. And so my favorite thing to do is to go there with my family and just spend time on the water. So that's my number one way to relax. But interestingly enough, I found a new way over the holidays. I had one of my law partners give me a puzzle for Christmas. And I've never done puzzles before. And so my husband and my daughter and I spent kind of the holidays working on this puzzle, and I just loved it. So I bought more puzzles. So it's just something that's mindless you can do, but you're, you know, and you could talk with your family while you're doing it. So I've really gotten into puzzles. It's very relaxing.
It keeps you thinking.
It does.
Do you read?
Not as much as I would like to, because I read so much for work. You know, it's to, you know, I do over the summer. If I take a vacation, I'll pick up a book, but I don't read as much as I used to.
Did you have any like influential books that you think girls should read before they go to college?
Well, this is going to be very cliche for a lawyer to say, but my favorite book is To Kill a Mockingbird. That's just honest.
It's a great book.
It is a fantastic book. And it's not why, you know, I wanted to go to law school. I mean, my favorite character is an Atticus. It's Scout. I mean, I love her. She is gentle and curious and spunky and everything I think a girl should be.
Do you think she became a lawyer? Second part of the story.
Maybe.
You never know. So if you had to go back to high school when you read that book, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to lighten up. I was way too serious. Now, don't get me wrong. I had a lot of fun in high school and college, but I was way too serious. Took myself too seriously, took academics too seriously. So I would tell myself to lighten up a little bit.
That's a common thing for all the people we've interviewed. We have all these really accomplished women, and they were so hard on themselves when they were younger. But it's interesting that you say just like enjoy the process as you go, because it can be so stressful.
Absolutely. And you're young, so enjoy it while you're young.
So what do you think made you so successful? Was it your work ethic because you were so hard on yourself?
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I think working hard will make you successful in any profession. But truly, I think the most important thing for me is to have grit, to be able to persevere when you have a challenge, to have staying power, to get back up when you're knocked down, those sorts of things. So grit and hard work.
What is the greatest piece of advice that you've ever received?
This is a piece of advice my mother always told me, and I hated it when she gave it to me. But she always said, this too shall pass. Every time I would call her, you know, before a big law school exam or with a falling out over a boy or whatever, and it just made me crazy. But it's excellent advice. Everything will change. I mean, that's the nature of our world. And so it's just great advice. If you're facing something, this too shall pass.
Change can be so scary sometimes.
It can.
I don't think anybody likes change.
But it's good when you're on the other side of it.
What do you mean?
When you see progress, you see change, and you see the results of it, it's great.
Rewarding change.
Exactly.
That makes sense. So how do you manage the rewarding change? How do you control your busy career and your home life every single day?
That depends a good bit on kind of the stage of my career. When I first started practicing law as an associate, I mean, you were putting in tremendous hours. And I had my first child, and luckily, my mother-in-law decided to retire about that time. So she took care of my first child for a while, and I was able to manage it. And then I got pregnant with my second son about 5 years later, and then had my daughter a year later. So that's when I had to call in get a nanny and all of that. So that kind of, and then now my kids are older, and of course they don't want to have anything to do with me, so it's really easy. I'm just kidding. But it's changed. And I would think that the most important thing that's allowed me to practice and succeed in my profession is that I found a spouse that we both manage the household. We both carry different things at different times. When he's really busy at work, I pick up the slack, and vice versa. So I would encourage you to find someone who is an equal partner. So that really helps.
What does he do?
He's in the trucking industry. He owns a trucking company, something completely different.
Y'all are the definition of hard work is paying off.
Yes. Or craziness. I don't know. One or the other.
Same thing.
Yeah,
Same
right.
thing. So we have asked you a lot of questions on this podcast, but if you had to get me to ask you something that you were interested in, what would it be?
You know, that's a very difficult question. One of the things that has been on my mind lately a lot is gratitude. So I guess my question would be, what are you grateful for? I've really tried to focus on that the last several months. My best friend from high school gave me a gratitude journal recently, and I've really, really focused on spending my days, my prayer time, my quiet time, just really focusing on gratitude. So the answer to that question, I guess, is I'm grateful for my women friendships. And if I had some advice to give young women, is to find women who build you up, who know you well, who will support you. I think that outside of my family and my kids and my spouse, those relationships with women that have my back have been the most rewarding in my life, to be honest. Now, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I understand that you and your sisters have been doing this podcast for a long time, and your sisters have now gone off to college.
Yes. Empty nester.
Right. Tell me how you've grown into this role, to doing this solo. And do you enjoy it?
I love it. But it wasn't easy when I first started. When I was a kid, I was about 4 feet tall, and I've always kind of had trouble with public speaking, honestly. It's never been my thing. Talking to a complete stranger, it's a little stressful. And I really had to put myself out there, not even in a podcast room, but at school. And there was really a huge character development from when I was the little kid that was just sitting at the table listening to being the one guiding the conversation, talking to other people. And I don't think that's just a personality change. I think it's also a confidence change.
Absolutely.
I feel like you probably see that in law too. You have to be the one to put yourself out there. And sometimes you think you're going to put yourself out there and you tell yourself, but it just doesn't flow. It doesn't come out. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that was definitely the hardest part. Just kind of calming myself down and not stressing about it and saying, everyone's just a person.
Right.
We're having a conversation, but you're just a person who's very successful, but you are a human. And you're a little scary, but not that scary.
That's funny. I'm only 5'1", Grace. Come on. I'm not scary.
I think
you could probably take me.
I think we're the same height, so I think we're in the same boat here.
I think so. Well, I'm really impressed. Do you enjoy listening to podcasts?
Yes, I usually like more of science podcasts. Actually, my AP environmental science teacher makes us do projects, and one of them was we had different diseases. Mine was mercury poisoning, and that's when I first started listening to podcasts that were scientific, and I thought they were so interesting. But before that, I'm Christian, and I listened to Father Mike Schmidt's Bible in a Year.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one.
It's so good. It's so good. They're 20 minutes long, and it goes through the entire Bible.
Oh, I need to check that out.
It's
because
really nice.
I've always said I wanted to read the Bible from front to back, and I've never done it.
Well, how do you, it's so hard to manage time to be able to make time for your hobbies too. And I have it with school. I can't imagine it with a full-time job plus kids. I don't know how you're able to do that.
You kind of have to prioritize yourself. You really do. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of your clients. You can't take care of your kids. You can't take care of your spouse. And I do better at that sometimes than others. But I have learned that you have to kind of fill your own tank in order to be successful personally or professionally.
Do you ever feel like you're just pushing yourself at the end of the day? You're so tired, but you just have to get that one last thing done.
Oh yeah, that's life. I don't care who you are, or what profession you're in. You're going to be pushed to the limits at times.
That never goes away.
No, it doesn't.
Great. Oh no.
I know. I'm all very hopeful, aren't I?
No, I'd rather understand it for what it is. I don't think life's going to get any easier. Everyone talks about how awful high school is sometimes, but people say it gets better when you get to college and you grow up because you have more freedom, but it sounds like you just get more responsibilities.
Well, you do, but you become more of who you're supposed to be, and you get more comfortable with yourself the older you get. You gain more confidence. So it's a process. I mean, life is a process. It's worth it.
That is such great advice for not just me, but everyone else my age and people that are aspiring to go into law or any type of profession. So if any young women are interested in pursuing law and want to learn more about your profession, where should they contact you?
Anyone can contact me just by looking at our firm website. It's Arendall Harrison Sale, and so all of my contact information is there. So feel free to contact me.
Thank you. We will make sure to put that in the show notes. That's a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much to everyone for listening.
This has been Girls Can, a podcast and an organization dedicated to improving the lives of young women in our community.
We want to encourage young women to make a difference through education and service.
Because the girls of today become the future leaders of tomorrow. Because the girls of today become the future leaders of tomorrow.